Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. This is the podcast where we help you challenge your mindset and discover where you are. Tired of stories about other people's success? We can help you change your life, determine your time freedom point, and join us on the journey to financial success. Let's go. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show. And we are continuing our series that talks about emotions and emotional aspects of money and investing. And today I want to talk to you about something that I would call ancestral money patterns. And what that means is basically that we are all, in a sense, very influenced. I can definitely say this for myself. We are very influenced by how we were brought up and what in our family history was considered normal. So in my case, for example, I can say our family, when it comes to the parents of my parents, so my grandparents, they had actually created a pretty reasonable life for themselves. My mother's side, not necessarily very wealthy or anything like that, but a good middle-class life. And on my dad's side, it was even a little better, where there was some real estate and some other investments and stuff like that. But both my mom and my dad decided to basically live their own life, do their own thing when they started growing up and forming a family. And they definitely didn't want in any way to be dependent on their parents or grandparents. And so in my upbringing, money was always scarce and was oftentimes a reason to have conflict and fights about it and stuff like that. I have had several mentoring clients who had a similar situation. And regardless what your exact upbringing is, you basically have two choices from a very big picture perspective. It's an active choice. The other one is basically passive. The active choice is to say what I have seen in my upbringing, in my family, not just in, what your parents do, but how your grandparents and in previous generations behaved when it came to money and what they did and what they accomplished. And you can actively say, I don't want to do this. I want to do it differently. Or the passive is, well, whatever I learn and what I see from my parent has basically been ingrained in me, and I'm going to do the same thing. Now, obviously, that is very much dependent, to some extent at least, on what it was. So in my case, my family was oftentimes fighting over money and money was always scarce. So my active decision was, I don't want to have that in my family. So I'm going to try to do anything and everything I can for one, to get to financial independence and financial freedom. And I wanted that not just for myself, but to also create generational wealth. So that will never be an issue, at least not based on what I can do about it, for my children and their children. Right. So I was basically determined to go the opposite way of what I had seen happening in my family. Now, you can also have a situation where your family has a very long history of being well off and wealthy. And you might say, okay, I don't want to be this kind of silver spoon person. And I actively want to make it on my own. And I don't want any of the money that my family already has. So that would be the active side. Now, in this particular case and for this particular episode, I wanted to go to the opposite side, where I had a client, her name was Lena, and she was basically struggling with conflicting emotions because her family, I would say, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but in a descriptive way, her family for generations has been poor. But what came on top of that was that they had basically accepted that they were poor. They were basically teaching their children that the fact and the reason that they were poor was because the system was rigged and that nobody could do anything about it. You could only try to live a life as good as you can. You couldn't expect to be rich. And those who were rich, who were probably getting rich or had gotten rich through kind of some nefarious or criminal means or stuff like that. But honest, hardworking people just had to accept that there was no path for them to be rich. But Lena had actually a really good job, and she was relatively early in her life when she came to me, and her job paid her significantly more than she needed for life. So she knew and she saw it every month. She had a good amount of money that she could put aside, and she did. she had like a ridiculous amount of money sitting in a savings account doing nothing. She basically said to me, in my family, we have always believed that money is the root of all evil. And on the other hand, I would like to build something better for myself, but more importantly for my children. So we looked into her history, her family history, and we found out, like I said, that generation after generation, they had always been relatively poor and have always blamed it on the system. So they just accepted that. And I basically helped Lena to understand that to do and reach different results, you have to do something different than what has been done before. So in her family, people had relatively low-paying jobs. Some of it was in agriculture, some of it was in hotel cleaning or restaurants and stuff like that. And she was somebody, the good job that I mentioned came from being one of the very first people in her family who had gotten a college degree. And that led her to get a good job in industry. And so she had kind of, in a sense, with her education already broken out of the tradition of her family, but financially she hadn't. And that was basically the question. Do you want to continue this ancestral money pattern that your family had gotten itself onto generation after generation? Or do you want to do the same thing that you did with your education, get out of that and basically start something new where you might be the first one to actually look into this? And she was mainly focused, and it changed over time. But initially she was saying, well, it's not really so much for me. It is mainly for my children. I want to have a family. I want to have children. I don't want to have them from the get-go live in financial scarcity. And I was super, super glad because she came to me very early. So we had many years to work together on building the situation into what she was really hoping for. And that's exactly what we did. I was able to make her aware that if she were to continue the same pattern, the so-called ancestral pattern that her family generation after generation had been on, then her results would be the same. And so we ultimately started to develop an investing plan based on the goals that she had. And what we did initially, which is probably a little bit unusual because most investors initially build their own portfolio before they start thinking about their kids. But with Lena, we basically started to do the investing for the kids right away. Now, there weren't any kids there. We just made dedicated investments for future kids, like child 1, child 2, child 3, literally. When those started to be established, and I said, well, Lena, we should also do something for you and for your future spouse so that you have a financial security, not just the kids in 20, 30, 40 years from now. She understood that obviously intellectually, and then we started to build her own portfolio. And we had a split where we basically were planning on 3 kids who were like each getting 15% of what she was willing to invest each and 65% for herself. And ultimately, years later, she got married and they kept, as long as they could, this kind of split. And I can tell you, for her, she and her family and her kids will be the first generation in this kind of ancestral tradition that will have a completely different financial situation. I want to say I really want to applaud Lena. I don't know if she is listening to our episodes, but I want to applaud her because she was the one who was willing to reach out and say, hey, this is my situation. Is there any chance for me to break out of it? And that's what I'm very grateful for, that she had the trust to say, hey, I need to find somebody to talk to and see if I can do something different. It's one thing when you listen to me talking about this, it kind of all sounds very logical and very easy. But when you're in that situation, you grew up that way and you were conditioned that you don't ask other people for money or for money advice, and you just have to accept that you always be poor. That's just the fate of your family. To overcome that is a huge step. So Lena, I applaud you, and you know that I love you and that I really appreciate that you did that. And for anybody listening to us, I really hope that you can analyze and look at what is my ancestral situation and ask yourself, do you want to passively continue down that road, which might be the right thing to do, or are you actively interested to change it? And if that's your thing, then you should also do what Lena did and reach out and find somebody that you trust and want to build a relationship with and at least talk about it. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're really going to change anything or make new investment decisions or stuff, but talk about it. So that you have an opportunity, and that's the beauty of coaching and mentoring, that you have an opportunity to discover what you really want and then get help to get there. So that's it for today. Be well and stay safe, and I talk to you tomorrow.